A mess hall is an area where military personnel socialize, eat, and live. In some societies this military usage has extended to other discipline services, eateries such as civilian firefighting and police forces. The root of mess is the Old French mes, portion of food, drawn from the Latin verb mittere, meaning to send, and to put, the original sense being a course of a meal put on the table, cfr. Also the modern Italian portata with the same meaning, past participle of portare, to bring. This sense of mess, which appeared in English in the 13th century, was often used for cooked or liquid dishes in particular, as in the mess of pottage. By the 15th century, a group of people who ate together were also called a mess, and it is this sense that persists in the mess halls of the modern military. Canada. Messing in the Canadian Forces generally follows the British model, from whom most traditions have descended. Basic regulations regarding the establishment and administration of messes is contained in the Queen's Regulations and Orders and the Canadian Forces Administrative Orders. As in the British forces, there are normally 3 messes: the officers' mess, the commissioned officers and officer cadets, the warrant officers and sergeants' mess, for senior non-commissioned officers and warrant officers, and the junior ranks mess, the junior non-commissioned officers, privates, and seamen. Some bases, such as CFB Kingston in the 1980s, had a master corporal's mess separate from the junior ranks. All of these, with the exception of the CFB Valcartier Master Corporal's Mess, have since been amalgamated with the junior ranks messes. Certain other bases, mainly training establishments such as HMCS Venture, have messes known as the gun room for the use of subordinate officers. Most bases and stations have 3 messes. Many of these establishments have lodger units who also have their own messes. All of Her Majesty's Canadian ships have 3 messes aboard. This extends to Naval Reserve divisions and other naval shore establishments which bear the title HMCS. Due to limited budgets and declining revenues, many messes have been forced to close or amalgamate. For example, at CFS Street, John's, the junior ranks mess of the Newfoundland Militia District closed, its members moving to the station's junior ranks. The station's officers' mess and warrant officers and sergeants' mess later amalgamated. Headdress is not worn in Canadian messes, except by personnel on duty, such as a duty watch officer or the military police, as permitted on special occasions, such as during costume parties, theme events, etc. By personnel for whom wearing headgear is mandatory. All Canadian Forces personnel, regular and reserve, must belong to a mess, and are termed ordinary members of the particular mess. Although normally on federal property, messes have been ordered to comply with the legal drinking age laws of the province. For example, an 18-year-old soldier may legally consume alcohol in a Quebec mess, but not in one in Ontario, where the legal age is 19 years. However, despite being underage, the soldier may not be prohibited entry into the mess. Canadian Forces personnel are normally welcome in any mess of their appropriate rank group, regardless of element. Thus, a regimental sergeant major of an infantry battalion is welcome in a chief's and petty officer's mess. Personnel of a different rank must ask for permission to enter, that may be granted by the president of the mess committee, his designate, or the senior member present. These restrictions are normally waived on certain special occasions, when the messes are opened to all personnel, regardless of rank. These occasions may include New Year's Day, January 1st, Call Day, Levy, Canada Day, July 1st, Remembrance Day, November 11th, The commanding officer of the establishment, a unit that owns the mess, is permitted access to all his messes. Thus a ship's captain has access to his vessel's chief's and petty officer's mess. The commanding officer of a regiment may enter any of his regimental messes, and the base commander of a Canadian Forces base is welcome in any of his base's messes. In practice, commanding officers rarely enter anything other than the officer's mess unless invited, as a point of etiquette. In addition, duty personnel, such as a duty NCO or officer of the watch, or the military police, have access to any and all messes for the purposes of maintaining good order and discipline. Chaplains are usually welcomed in all messes. As in the UK, Canadian messes are run by the Mess Committee, a group democratically elected by the members of the mess. One exception is on warships, where the president of the junior ranks mess is appointed by the commanding officer. The committee members are generally the same as those of the British counterparts, with the addition of special representatives for such things as sports, housing, morale, etc. These positions are normally spelled out in the mess constitution, which sets out the bylaws, regulations, and guidelines for such things as conduct of mess meetings, associate memberships, dress regulations within the mess, or booking of the mess by civilian organizations. The Constitution and any amendments are voted upon by the members of the mess. Germany. The Federal German Armed Forces differentiates between three different mess areas. 1. HBG, more commonly called enlisted mess. It is common for most bases to have one, where food and drink can be purchased. Newspapers and in some cases equipment and souvenirs such as keychains may also be available. There is generally no strict regulation of conduct, even though access is not limited to enlisted personnel, and NCOs or officers may also be present, ensuring a more regulated conduct. 2. UHG, also called UK, Non-Commissioned Officers Mess. This is the area where NCOs can dine or spend their evenings. As opposed to the HBG, the UHG has a constitution, bylaws and a board. Access is usually restricted to NCOs, while officers can gain entry, even though it is usually frowned upon by the NCOs. Some bases have a joint NCO and officers mess. 3. OHG, also called casino. Much like the UHG, the casino also has a constitution, bylaws and a board. Gentlemanly conduct is mandatory. For instance, upon entering the main hall, officers are expected to stand at attention and perform a small bow. Additionally, veterans' meetings are usually held either in a UHG or in a casino. As with the UHG, casinos have permanent personnel, as a general rule enlisted men, called ordonnansen, a military term for waiter or barman. Some casinos have grand pianos, and hold recitals, as well as having music played during luncheons or dinners. Official events such as balls and unofficial events such as weddings, informational events and the like are held here. The German Navy call the messes Messe, with the distinction of Physiomesse. The land-based messes are also called the Physiomesse. India. The Indian Army follows a system similar to the British. A typical regiment unit would have one mess and two clubs, one for the commissioned officers, club for the junior commissioned officers and one for the NCOs. Havildars, daffaders are considered to be NCOs. The Air Force, however, has an SNCO mess for warrant officers and sergeants, while lower-ranking NCOs would be members of the NCO's mess. In the officers' mess and the JCO's club, there also is rank of mess havildar. A mess havildar is a senior NCO who manages and executes the day-to-day activities of the mess club. On Republic Day, the JCOs are formally invited for cocktails at the officers' mess. This is reciprocated on Independence Day by the JCOs at the JCOs Club. Israel Navy. In the Israeli Navy, although Hebrew-speaking, dining rooms on the missile boats, dolphin submarines, and the kitchen in the patrol boats are named messes, crew mess and officers' mess. Also, every special meal brought by a crew member, say celebrating a birthday or a rank promotion, is called mess. United Kingdom. On a naval or military establishment there are usually 2 or 3 messes: the officers' mess, the commissioned officers, the chief petty officers or warrant officers, and sergeant's mess for senior non-commissioned officers and warrant officers. The junior rates are corporal's mess. The junior NCOs, officers and SNCOs are required under Queen's regulations to be a member of a mess, and unmarried members usually live, eat, and socialize in them. The JNCO's mess, if established, is normally used for socializing only. JNCOs usually being accommodated in barrack block seating in the cookhouse alongside private soldiers and able rates. Depending on circumstance, such as lack of finance or space, some regiments may have a JNCO club instead of a proper mess. Members of the mess are also required to pay a subscription fee for supplies and upkeep. The amount is decided upon by the commanding officer within the limits stipulated by the regulations. Soldiers, sailors, or air personnel are welcome in any mess for the rank or equivalent, should they be away from the home unit, as long as they are paying dues in at least one mess. For the warrant officers and sergeants' mess, the highest-ranking member is known as the presiding member. A mess is run by the mess committee, a group democratically elected by the members of the mess, but normally agreed by the CO or RSM, president of the mess committee, or chairman of the mess committee, vice president of the mess committee, who is responsible for toasts during mess dinners. He or she is rarely the deputy of the PMC, but instead the most junior person in the mess. Treasurer, secretary, who is responsible for records and minutes, etc. Wines member, who is responsible for keeping the bar stocked. House member, who is responsible for furniture and infrastructure. Entertainments member, for any special events or parties in the mess. Some messes also have a senior living-in member who represents the living-in members and supervises the conduct. The commanding officer of the unit has right of veto over the mess, and any changes or events must have his approval. The CO is allowed into any mess, but it is often considered an abuse of power, unbecoming conduct, to disturbing the order for a CO to drink in a lower-rank mess, except when invited on special occasions. The officers' mess in a Royal Navy ship or base is called the wardroom. Associated with the wardroom is a gunroom, the mess for midshipmen and occasionally junior sub-lieutenants. The captain of a vessel is not normally a member of the wardroom, which is always run by the first lieutenant or executive officer, thereby known as the mess president. This post is part of the job of being a ship's XO. Other committee members are generally appointed by the XO. Mess dress is the military term for the formal evening dress worn in the mess or at other formal occasions. It is also known as mess kit. Mess dress would be worn at occasions requiring white tie, black tie. United States, U.S. Army. In the United States Army, officers historically have had to purchase their own food using funds allocated to each officer. In the far-flung forts of the American Old West, officers would organize the food service in 2 ways. Closed mess was when the few officers of a small fort would pool all of the food funds to provide all meals to members only, thus being closed to outsiders except as guests. In a larger post, the larger pool of officers could allow the officers to purchase meals on an individual meal basis. Such arrangements were called open messes. The mess now is called a dining facility. The officers' club is an outgrowth comparable to the officers' open mess, but also providing areas to allow officers to entertain guests. A similar version for enlisted personnel is the E-club. Mess also describes the formal affair of having a dining in held for military members and closed to the public, or a dining out, a social event for military personnel and the families. For much of the 20th century, the Army's mess food selection was part-in, but after the end of the draft they changed to a food court-in model with more variety including fast food, while also making fast food franchises available on bases. In 2011, the Army rolled out a program known as Soldier Athlete, which promotes healthier foods including low-fat milk, whole grains, and veggie wraps. U.S. Navy. At most United States Navy shore installations, galleys provide messing for sailors ashore and is an option for sailors aboard ships, while in port at those installations, commissioned officers may use these facilities if in a duty officer status under the pretext of inspecting, sampling the mess. In addition to galleys ashore, various social clubs with dining facilities may also exist. These are enlisted clubs for sailors in the grade of petty officer first class and below, chief petty officer clubs for CPOs, SCPOs and MCPOs, and officers clubs for commissioned officers, although many have been closed, merged into combination enlisted CPO clubs, or converted into all-hands enlisted and officer facilities. Such changes began to be imposed following the congressionally mandated end of budgetary subsidies for all such clubs in the 1990s and the subsequent need for these clubs to be financially self-sufficient. Further impacting the club system ashore for the Navy is the fact that most naval units deploy for extended periods on a regular basis with, especially for shipboard personnel, requiring for senior enlisted personnel and commissioned officers to maintain concurrent membership in a ship's CPO mess or officer's wardroom, respectively. At sea aboard naval vessels, messing is still separate, with E6 and below utilizing the ship's mess decks, E7 through E9 utilizing the ship's CPO mess, and commissioned officers being part of the wardroom. Certain large vessels may also include a first-class mess for E6, typically a separate dining area adjacent to the mess decks. This is considered a chance for future CPOs to learn how to be a part of a mess before they enter the CPO mess, often called by the sobriquet of goat locker. Enlisted personnel normally receive all meals at what appears to be no cost, but in fact subsidize the meals through forfeiture of the basic allowance for subsistence, also called commuted rations. Although chief petty officers may also have a mess buy-in and/or monthly mess bill equivalent to the bar. For those ships with embarked Marine Corps personnel, staff non-commissioned officers in the grades V7, E8 and E9 will also be part of the CPO mess. Commissioned officers retain the bar, a flat rate allowance much smaller than the graduated by rank amount paid out to enlisted personnel. However, they must pay for all of the meals while afloat out of pocket. This usually entails a mess buy-in as a member of the officers' mess and will typically have either a monthly mess bill or will purchase meals via some sort of debit card. U.S. Air Force social clubs on United States Air Force installations were at one time called open messes, even though most were known in vernacular as officers' clubs or NCO clubs. Those four officers were able to utilize their initials as colorful acronyms, among the more well-known of which in the 1960s and 1970s were Zaragoza and Zweibrücken, Da Nang, Ramstein, and Karag. at air bases are Kirtland Air Force Base, Randolph AFB and Nellis AFB, with the nicknames usually ascribed to those facilities casual bars versus the entire club. At one time, each squadron had its club, and some flying squadrons continue to maintain a bar in the squadron facilities for officer and enlisted aircrew to this day, but most disappeared after World War II and the various airmen's clubs, senior NCO clubs and officers' clubs became facilities of a base rather than a unit. Most are now officially referred to as officer or enlisted clubs, the term mess or officers' open mess having largely disappeared from the Air Force lexicon, though a few bases have separate airmen's clubs for junior enlisted and NCO clubs for non-commissioned officers. This is no longer normally the case. Physically separate officers' clubs still exist at some installations, however. Smaller Air Force installations may have one consolidated club with separate lounges. Membership is voluntary, though highly encouraged for senior NCOs and officers. Most NCO and officers' clubs contain a sit-down restaurant in addition to social lounges, meeting, dining rooms, and bars. Mess halls in the USAF where unmarried junior enlisted residing in the dormitories are expected to eat are officially referred to as dining facilities but are colloquially called chow halls, although dining facility workers traditionally take offense at the term. U.S. Marine Corps. In the United States Marine Corps, enlisted dining facilities ashore are commonly referred to as galas or chow halls. When embarked aboard naval vessels, enlisted Marines and NCOs in the rank of Staff Sergeant and below will use the same mess decks as sailors in the grade of Petty Officer First Class and below, while Staff NCOs in the rank of Gunnery Sergeant and above will take meals in the Chief Petty Officer's mess. Separate enlisted, NCO and officers' clubs continue to exist at Marine Corps shore installations, following the Navy model of enlisted, CPO and officers' clubs. Marine clubs have also been in decline. According to an article by USA Today, alcohol deglamorization in the late 80s started the decline, says Carol Garland, head of the Marine Corps Food and Hospitality, Personal and Family Readiness Division. Appropriated funds to support the operation of clubs, including managers, were greatly reduced. Without appropriated funds, clubs had to be self-supporting businesses. U.S. Coast Guard. The United States Coast Guard follows the U.S. Navy model in terms of messing facilities afloat on a shore in terms of the demarcation of galleys for E6 and below, CPO messes for E7 through E9, and wardrooms for commissioned officers. The only exception is that, given its small size, there are very few Coast Guard clubs aboard Coast Guard installations, and those that do exist are typically all-hands facilities.